Book 5 of The Wheel of Time, The Fires of Heaven. We are continuing the Wheel of Time read-along here. I'm sorry that I took a bit of extra time. I just kept getting like DMs on Instagram and comments saying like, I still need more time, please, for the love of God. So I figured I would delay it, and now I will delay it again for another 5 weeks before we do Book 6, and that means it'll be right around the time the show drops. But this will be a full spoiler up into this book discussion of the Fires of Heaven. So let's go ahead and jump on into it. This is the book of ramifications, I realized on this read through. I mean, directly we're kicking off essentially with Elaida and seeing how the tower split has made it so the seat of the Amyrlin, something that we have been hyped up to tremendous extents about in terms of its power and influence, isn't necessarily even being respected. Elaida is kind of being dismissed by her peers, and she is in this power struggle now to assert herself as a true Amyrlin, which she is not. And what I find maybe most interesting about this dynamic is, like, for any other character, you'd be like, hey, I'm on your side, you just get that power, but because it's Elaida, you're like, you. It's just like, yeah, I don't care, get disrespected, I don't give a shit. Like, even my care for the seat of Amyrlin, which as someone who's highly invested in this world, I just have no desire to see her amp up her level of power and control. And it's because she is the Umbridge of Wheel of Time. She is just that hateable of hateable characters, and I really hope they keep that for the show, because having a character you can hate to that extent is so much fun. We also get some more displays of Black Aja workings within the White Tower, and I don't know, this just was more interesting to me, the political angle of the corruption within the White Tower, more than ever in this read through. Specifically how the White Tower wasn't caused to fall by a lot of like Forsaken pushing or shadow manipulation. Yes, there are agents certainly greasing the wheels, but this institution basically did itself in. And that's really the grand secondary conflict of the Wheel of Time. Of course, the shadow is the big bad, but by this point in the series, I think most readers have realized a just as dangerous secondary antagonist is the follies within us, where we're always battling for power and questioning those around us who, you know, maybe just falling into line can be the better option. Elaida, Siuan was a great Amyrlin. But I almost could find myself taking the stance of backing a character who's like, look, the last battle's coming, Elaida's in power, we just gotta fall in line and unite against the shadow. Like, there are Aes Sedai who have that perspective, and I don't necessarily blame them. Like, I actually, if I was in the White Tower when the split happened, I would fight for Siuan's side. But once Elaida was securely in place, the idea of trying to put yet another grand transition of power into place in such a crucial time seems like it could be making things even weaker. So personally, while I'd be against her, I might be one of those who's like, we gotta do the best with what we got. And now we really gotta work hard. Until she does what she does in the next book. But we'll get to that later. We also have, I'm sorry, something I consider the grand time-wasting plot of Siuan Min, the burning the barn, and the... Ugh. I know this is just an excuse to get one of the great generals into the narrative, and it feels like that. I just don't love this whole thing with Logain and them, like, burning a barn. It's blech. I've heard some people say it's like a good showing Siuan's intelligence of like making this grand oath, but like, I'm not gonna pay it off now. And I agree, Siuan's a very intelligent character. It's just not that smart to lie, which she's basically doing. She's fully taking advantage of the fact that she's no longer an Aes Sedai, but it just doesn't, I don't know, nothing about this whole thing engaged me whatsoever, but what happens next definitely did. And that's seeing Ravin's manipulation of Morgase. This is something that feels dangerous and has that oh so signature Robert Jordan implication of so much worse behind the scenes. Because Morgase is now firmly under the control of one of the most evil, sadistic psychopaths in the history of the world. And we know she's been put through some really awful stuff. Jordan doesn't ever really make it explicit yet, but it kind of makes you immediately get a pit in your stomach and hate Ravin so much more. Her escape does set stakes and put in motion it's one of these really nice Robert Jordan plot devices where it feels necessary, it's well earned, it definitely makes sense to these characters, and at the same time, it's a small pushing of a boulder that for books to come has just tremendous implications, not only for Rand's actions, Elaine's, so many more, and yeah, I really enjoy it, and I feel so bad for Morghese having to go on the run and feeling so displaced. I know she's like a person of extreme privilege, but like you can't help but feel really bad for someone who's been made into such a victim and suddenly has their entire life taken from them and really only has like a parental figure alongside them, which is a dynamic I really enjoy between Leany and Morghese. Yes, Morghese is a full-grown woman, but even people who are full-grown adults can still have parental figures, and that's what Leany is towards Morghese. And I actually found there just be this really wholesome, loving angle that, I don't know, just felt comforting between them. And Leany's champion. And then we have the attempted kidnapping of Elaine and Nynaeve, which is a really nice character beats for the whole party. I love Tom and Julian working together and their saving of Elaine and Nynaeve. But it's not a trap that felt like, oh no, Elaine and Nynaeve wouldn't fall for that. It was a pretty well handled trap. And it's not because it's like a super genius, like laid out intricate ploy, but it's a lack of information on Nynaeve and Elaine's end, causing them to step blindly into something that anyone really would. So it doesn't feel condescending to the characters, but it's kind of like this simple, like, damn. It's like stepping in a bear trap with a light coating of leaves over it. You're like, it's not my fault, but and, oh, right, we have this meeting of Forsaken, who are truly displaying their level of incompetence because they're like, let's leave Rand alone, all right? He's the one guy we should really be trying to kill, because if we just nixed him right now, we would for sure win. But instead, let's let the one of us who was in love with the previous version of this guy handle it. Everyone okay with that? Like, is Ravine the only one of you who's actually competent? Because he's the only one putting himself in a position of power and suddenly becoming a massive swaying force within this land because he is actually usurping a throne. Something that I feel like all these Forsaken should be doing, but so many of them are content to just be like, I'm in my palace doing kinky stuff. Like, that's what so many Forsaken are just like fine with doing now that they're back. I guess with thousands of years of pent-up sexual tension, that's the end result. I don't know. It's kind of strange. The introduction and utilization of dreamwalking as a spy mechanic is one of my favorite creative ideas in Robert Jordan's entire bibliography. It is something I didn't think of the first time I actually saw dreamwalking. I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. You can kind of like, be in other people's camps and stuff. But I never thought it would be a detailed representation enough of reality to actually allow spying. And to be fair, it's not like a great version of spying because you're constantly losing the information you're looking at. But it's just enough to be this wonderful little look into the other side that no one can see coming. And it's smart enough that I believe they're not going to have things up to stop against it. Because who is going to be sitting there thinking like, Dreamwalkers, that one fringe thing, maybe they can look in my desk. I have to mention the circus at this point because Elaine and Nynaeve joined the circus, and as much as I've been praising Jordan up to this point, every time I've read The Wheel of Time, the circus becomes something that I like less. The first time through it, I was like, that's a fine enough little weird kooky setting, but especially on this read through, it became painful. Valen Luca feels like an outdated character to even exist in Wheel of Time. Like, he's just obnoxious and shallow. There's no depth beyond just, I'm annoying and hitting on Nynaeve. There are some genuinely funny moments within the circus in terms of, using the power to actually accomplish some circus-esque feats, but overall it was just kind of obnoxious. Galad's great though. People hate on Gawain a lot, and some people hate on Galad a lot. And I get it, because he strikes you as the ultimate Boy Scout obnoxious jerk. But if you genuinely look at his actions throughout the series, at least he practices what he preaches, which is why the White Cloaks are really the perfect setting for him. He is someone who, like, the White Cloaks are such a clear representation of corrupt versions of politics and religion in the real world. I mean, they are the definition of people who proclaim their purity and righteousness, but are actually like the dregs of society. So that proclaimed message of purity, of course, attracted Galad, but he comes into this group and sees their flaws, and he basically starts trying to find the people who actually want to live up to it, bringing them closer to himself, and causing his own little sway of power. And it's cool to see that for him. And I can't hate him that much because his bite follows up his bark. Like, I can at least appreciate that, overlay it with his badass ability with his sword, and I'm like, so just how hot are you? Although I want to put it to rest. A lot of people are like, well, maybe Galad's as good as Lan with a sword. Look at their feet side by side. Absolutely not. No swordsman in all of Wheel of Time comes close to Lan outside of the Forsaken. That is just true. I will fight you all day on that. Yes, Galad can take on a mob of just like peasants. Lan can take on multiple Fades at once. There's a pretty big difference there. Galad is genuinely great though. He's just not that great. I will say the Seanchan angle to this book too was again a nice examination for Robert Jordan culturally. I understand some readers might not be interested in this, but I like the idea of having this kind of like lost Seanchan along for the ride and seeing the cultural brainwashing that Seanchan's been through slowly be chipped away by just exposure to those she's been told she should hate, which is something that has actually happened in my own real life. Seeing people who are homophobic or racist suddenly have that anger, that hatred within them chipped away by just being around LGBTQ plus people or people of color and being like, oh yeah, everyone's humans and we should treat each other with respect. Fucking rocket science right there, right? And with the mild inconsistencies within Wheel of Time magic system that do pop up throughout the series, we have Birgitte being brought into the real world through the dream world, which I remember explicitly my first time through the series. I thought, this can't be justified. This is just something Robert Jordan wanting Birgitte to come into the narrative, and it'll never make sense. Fortunately, I was wrong, because there is absolutely, once you understand how all the magic systems are interconnected and you see some things spoiler-free down the road, it does suddenly make more sense that Moghedien would be able to do this, and the ploy against Rand sets up great motivation for Elayne and Nynaeve, yada yada yada. But now leaning into this bonding of Birgitte, her and Elayne have fantastic chemistry, and I enjoy their friendship quite a bit, but it brings up this question of like, well, there aren't female warders. People are going to push back on this, and no one really does. It's one of these things where like people hear about it and we have like small moments of you can't do that. Stop. It goes into Jordan's handling of gender roles in the world, where sometimes he would follow through on a concept and explore, you know, the differences between men and women in a kind of interesting way. And other times he just puts forward like a, this isn't done. Now it is. But one of the biggest representations of the flaws within the light is brought into the narrative at this point, and that would be the prophet, who is a religious zealot genuinely trying to serve Rand and doing the worst job of it, to put it lightly. It's like if you came out and you were like, hey, I'm God, and underneath you immediately, without asking you at all, there was just someone who's like, we need to kill everyone who doesn't follow this God. You'd be like, no, wait, I did not say that. And then there's this dude like, kill them all! Which is one of the coolest premises for an antagonist the series has, in my opinion. I actually really love the premise of this character, the prophet. The follow-through, again, though, I just find somewhat lackluster, but we'll get into that in future books. So then Nynaeve and Elayne and some Borderlanders go and meet up with the Saladar Aes Sedai. And it really settled into me at this point that, like, they are the rebels. They are not the actual White Tower, and while the Amyrlin is a unjust Amyrlin within the White Tower, if I was a political figure sitting out looking in at the schism in the Aes Sedai, I would go, well, one still holds the institution. One is actually, you know, bearing all the abilities, connections, links. You have the power, and that is the Tower Aes Sedai. And then I would look at the rebels. And obviously, as a ruler, I would not be privy to the fact that the Tower Aes Sedai essentially had an unjust trial for Swan. I would just hear, most likely through my trusted tower contacts, that there was a trial, the sitting Amyrlin was deposed, and now there's a new one, but some rebels didn't like it. And so I've seen people say, like, why would anyone back the Tower Aes Sedai? Because they don't get the full story. You have to remember to put yourself in the narrative and be like, okay, if you're the noble, your trusted tower contacts are probably going to be the ones that the Tower Aes Sedai are using to disseminate their message of their version of events. And then the Rebel Aes Sedai are at this extreme position of disadvantage where they have to come to the table and say, we're the ones who left, listen, and then try and convince them that the trial was unjust in one of the most respected established institutions in the world, whose trials and like mechanisms you as a ruler have probably been told since you were a child are literally like above mankind. They are magical. They are ascended beings. So we then have Nynaeve's conflict with Moghedien, which leads them to Caemlyn and Tel Riyadh, and we'll get back to that later because we need to cut to other plot lines. So Rand is stuck between a rock and a spear place because he has divided the Aiel, weakened them massively by uniting them under him, and now he's being taught by one of the Forsaken, Asmodean, how to manage the power that's slowly going to inevitably drive him insane. I don't envy. That's a lot. That's a lot to take. That sucks. That sucks right there. And the progression of Rand's insanity is. I've had a theory about this since like my second or third time reading the series, where it's not something that progressively gets worse. Rand does not wake up every day slightly more mad. Instead, he wakes up some days more mad, and he'll wake up the next day a little less. And it's not even like based on sleep. He'll have an afternoon that's pretty good, followed by an evening that's pretty bad. And that's how mental illness often works. So I actually really like, as we're following his perspective, watching that ebb and flow. It's very realistic to my own anxiety, depression, paranoia that I suffer from, seeing him kind of struggle and battle the same. I love that. And if you pay attention, it really does vary POV perspective to POV perspective to Rand. There's sometimes you follow him where he's making logical, good decisions, and there's other times where he's coming across like a paranoid, not healthy person. But mixing things all up even worse, there's some elements coming into the mixture of his head where you don't think it's the insanity, it's just like other connections of being the dragon. And so it's it's hard to be Rand's brain. It's a lot. It's very difficult. We then have an attack on all the Aiel and Rand and everything, and Mat is busy getting laid when it happens, which that sucks for him. That's not a good time for an attack to happen. The one thing that on this reread kind of rubbed me the wrong way, though, was after all this goes down and Moiraine, so fed up with Rand, she agrees to take an oath of servitude to him. And I found myself really in line with Lan's mentality watching this, where he's like, that's awful. Like, that's just no. To me, I get why Moiraine does it. She's desperate to stay close to Rand and guide him in any way that she possibly can, because obviously he's a warhead about to go off. But it just doesn't feel earned for Rand, because Rand has been mule-headed, he's made mistakes, and Moiraine, largely, while she is not open enough with Rand, I get why she's not. Why would you trust someone whose dreams are not secure, whose mind seems insecure? Maybe the Forsaken know everything Rand thinks, hears, and says, so maybe don't open up to him. She has a lot of reasons, a lot of layers to prevent her from totally trusting Rand, and Rand is expecting that level of openness from her. So I get why there's the frustration with Moiraine, because she comes across standoffish. I just think there's far more justification for her being a bit standoffish when there's a lot of things in the prophecy about Rand not maybe being someone you want to trust and give everything to. It's just one of those things you often see readers fall into, where they're like, oh, I'm siding with the protagonist, the person I'm more POV with, the young up-and-coming farm boy. But if you take back and you look back the sheet of facts, I'm not saying it's completely the right decision on Moiraine's point. There's just definitely reasoning. I also really like for Rand that while they're chasing the Shaido out of the Aiel Waste, we get him remembering facts about the Forsaken, which is so interesting. It's such a great choice to have him like, that's Samael's tactics. which lets us know, it keys us in as readers that this is not all just insanity. There's genuine something else building within Rand. Whether it's good or bad kind of remains behind this veil, but there is some truth to the far reaches his mind is going to. So then we get the siege, though, where the Shaido are attacking Carian. There's some tier lords that Rand has sent before he even left for the Waste who are trying to help, and we are getting our big battle. Like, I remember this kind of being a surprise when I first read the book, but no, this is going to end in a massive conflict, and it's the siege of Carian, where really we're having the Wetlands and Aiel versus the Shaido. I just wish the Shaido... Okay, showtime. I actually hope the Shaido in the show are not dragged out as long as they are in the book, and if it were up to me, we would see a lot of their plot lines and their influence in the story really come to an end here. I would like to see a lot of the doubt and, mistrust in the Aiel continue on. I just don't think you necessarily need the Shaido for that, and it would help clean up a lot of issues if we kind of just eliminated them here. But they do get delivered a devastating blow, and our people come out on top after quite the heavy sacrifice. And just continuing cleaning up this battle real quick, Mat goes against Couladin. We don't really get to see it, but Mat kills Couladin, and he's just like, I guess I did that. I love that that's kind of his like, yeah, I'm the slayer of Couladin. I don't know if I like it. I'm a hero? Oh, I forgot the igloo. Before any of this, Rand walks in on Aviendha naked. She accidentally makes a gateway. Rand jumps through after her. They run through the snow. They make an igloo. And how is that not the most romantic setting ever? So they go to boinky woinky oinky land. And then they come back and Aviendha's like, that'll never happen again. And Rand's like, oh, no. Can we... marriage? Which, if there's anyone within the Wheel of Time that I would propose to immediately with, it would probably be Aviendha. So good job. Sorry, I know I screwed up the order of this battle. I also want to include, before the battle though, we also have Mat like showing his true genius as a battle tactician all of a sudden. And I've always enjoyed like Rand looking at Lan and being like, did you see that? And Lan's line of dialogue to me always comes across as like, I'm not dealing with that. Lan's like, I got enough things on my plate. I saw what he did. That's Mat. That's not my issue. At the end of the battle, though, we see how hard Rand has pushed himself to achieve this victory, and it's far harder than he needed to. I mean, I think that's made pretty clear. The battle's been won, and he's still out there just aggressively chunking away, trying to clean up any last remnants of resistance, and that plays into the theme of him just putting so much on his shoulders constantly. Rand is on a trajectory to break himself, and it's not sustainable for him to be the dragon. It's a continual problem with his character where it makes absolute sense. If you're this young farmer who's handed all this responsibility and you're told if you fail, the world ends, you're going to try and manage it all and always push yourself to the max. And it's one of those paradoxes where doing that is going to result in your failure. And we see Rand nearly kill himself here. And if he had done that, game over, Shadow wins. So it draws a pretty hard line of showing us that Rand does not know his limits at all. And where narrative feels like this book should be ending, we have a final act that is far more emotionally investing than a battle that, while it was cool, you didn't really have hard stakes in it. So to me, it felt like Jordan was like, I can't combine these two conflicts, so we'll have our awesome battle, then we'll have our emotional climax. And this is when Rand finds out that Gabriel, Rahvin, has declared himself King of Caemlyn after Morghase's death. And having a love interest with Elayne, Rand is mad and decides to go try and kill Rahvin, one of the Forsaken, because he feels an extraordinary level of responsibility for what he believes to be Elayne's death. Us, the reader, know that she's not dead, but that kind of just adds an even more tragic angle to this, as Rand, who has so clearly pushed himself so hard, is now setting off to match himself against one of the Forsaken. And we also have a scene here where Mat is attacked by the woman he was hooking up with before, and she tries to stab him. It's a wonderful example of how this Ta'veren Talviren luck would feel so gimmicky if it wasn't so antithetical to what the characters want. Like, of course, Matt's happy he lived, that this knife happened to hit this medallion and break because, of course. But at the same time, it results in this woman dying, which, despite her just trying to kill Matt, hurts him. And it makes him feel so unfree. And as we've had this realization that he's tied to Rand and can't get away, Matt has these walls closing in on him. And the luck is there, but the luck feels so oppressive. But this is like an attempt at killing one of the main three boys by a Forsaken, and again, it feels weak. Like, yeah, Maiden of the Spear, good assassin, but just that, going up against a Talviren, who you know is a powerful Talviren, the Forsaken aren't great. So then we have this emotional climax, which is structurally odd, but works very well, where Moiraine tells Rand, hey, before you go on this adventure, meet me at the docks. And at the docks, simultaneously, Lanfear, who, you know, was hiding among the peddlers in the last book, is catching up with one of her agents who tells him, hey, I think Rand's been hooking up with this chick, and that causes Lanfear to go at the dock. And so then there's a fight. She hurts Elaine and Aviendha, kneels Rand, and is like, I'm going to take you now. And so Moiraine Ray Lewis's Lanfear through a doorway, and that's the end of her. And the next book largely explores what it's going to be like for our main characters without Moraine's guidance and protection. It's big. This is a hit that goes hard. I'm not going to get into spoilers beyond this book for obvious reasons, but having Moiraine ripped away as a guiding force and having her give Rand this letter beforehand being like, hey, I knew this was going to happen. It's the way things have got to be. Good luck. I made this call. And Rand, God, Rand, he's such a... You love Rand, but you got problems with him, which is what makes him so interesting, where he won't accept help while he's actually at the hands of one of the Forsaken in that moment. And you get his motivation. Rand makes sense, but he's a stubborn idiot. And there's this brilliantly powerful scene where a Maiden of the Spear comes in and starts breaking spears in front of Rand, saying like, look, you're not letting us do our job. Why are we here? Let us protect you. And Rand has a powerful moment where he's like, yes, I will let these Maidens of the Spear get my back and actually put their lives at risk for me, which shows a moment of real growth from him. Finally. Oh, and Lan goes off to be compelled by Moiraine in a very kind of vile way to go be with another sister who his bond is passed to, which... You get why Moiraine did it, but even as a reader this time through, I still was like, that's not cool. You're taking away his free will as a man. That's not great. But as I first read this book, I figured he'd call off his attack on Ravine, but he's like, nope! We're going in! And so he goes to Caemlyn with Aviendha, Matt, and a bunch of other people. Immediately, they set off a ton of attacks from Ravine because, of course, Ravine's naturally a competent Forsaken, so he has layers and layers and layers of wards protecting himself from an attack. But Rand comes in like such an overwhelming avalanche. He just sets them all off, gets Aviendha and Matt killed, and then pushes on through further to actually having his confrontation with Ravine, where, as we've touched on before, Nynaeve and Moghedien are actually coming to help as well. And now there's this showdown where a Nynaeve provides the distraction needed for Rand to balefire the shit out of Ravine, which Moiraine just warned him never to do, but like she did it, so it's fine. And because he uses the balefire, Matt and Aviendha are back alive. And Matt, I love that Matt is so confused. Like we get back to Matt and he's like, did I die? There is one way to cure death within Wheel of Time, and you risk destroying reality to do it, and that is balefiring, and maybe not worth, kind of worth here, because without Matt, the world's over. So worth this one time, but super duper not again. Oh, and after this, though, we also have Nynaeve taking Moghedien prisoner. Nice, because she trapped her within the dream in a way that actually affected her in the real world. Good job. But then in the biggest jaw-dropping moment of this entire book that is filled with them, we have Rand do his most important decree as the dragon. Offer amnesty to any man who can channel. which is a huge deal because now every man who can channel has one place they can go to not be hunted and killed, and it's in the custody of the Dragon Reborn, setting up a huge dynamic shift for this world in future books. And that is just such a credit to Jordan's world building. I love that he is able to have this established way and rule in the world and use one of our characters working against it to make us feel these tidal shifts in the current of the story. Oof, brilliant. This is not my favorite Wheel of Time book, but upon rereading it, it actually went up quite a few rankings. And I actually have already finished my rereading of the 6th Wheel of Time book. That one fell a bit. These two almost like swapped in their positioning. So stay tuned for my, read along in 5 weeks of book 6 as well. But let me know what you thought of this one in the comments down below. What are your meditations, thoughts, examinations here? I would give this a solid 8 out of 10 for a Wheel of Time book. It's enjoyable. It has a couple slower moments and maybe some flaws here and there, but you know what? 8.5. I really found myself compelled in a way I previously haven't with reads of the 5th book. And with those tidal movements, God, I respect Jordan's craft as an author. God, I do. Love his world building. But anyway, everyone, like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon to support what I do here. And have a good one now. Peace. And of course, I'd like to record a special shout out to my latest high tier Patreon, Michael Velastrigo. Thank you so much.